and he was up to his neck in water hanging on to the wheel. So I went back to help him out and said, "You okay, Stu?" And he's a Kiwi and very, he's the king of the Southern Ocean. He's done more laps than most people I know of the planet. And he said in a very sort of deadpan Kiwi drawl, he said, "Richard, I'm not very comfortable right now."
Ahoy, shipmates. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm normally your host, Andy, but I am not hosting today. I think it's a Nikki episode today, which you'll enjoy. I'm in Nukuhiva. Just wanted to give everybody a quick update from the Marquesas. Getting ready to get the new crew here to sail to Tuamotus and Tahiti. So finally getting to enjoy the South Pacific. It's surreal that we're here. I just drove to the airport and back to pick up a friend who's joining on the next leg, and the roads on this island, there's 2 roads on the island, and they just wind these switchbacks up and over the mountain. I think the top part of the island's like 3,000 feet. It's like being in Jurassic Park. It's wild. We had manta rays swimming around the boat yesterday in the morning, like so close you could have reached down and touched them. I got a video of that, so if you follow us on Instagram, you can see some of that stuff we're doing. A couple updates. We had a cancellation on a crew for the Shetland race on Eastbjorns. That's coming up in June. So if you want to do the Shetland race, that's with our skipper Eric. There's I think 1 or 2 spots open on that, so check that out. Mia's going to send a newsletter out as well. So if you're not signed up to our newsletter, do that at 59-north.com/news. And as I said before, we've opened our 2027 calendar. Falcon's heading back to the Atlantic. Feels like a long way away from here, both in time and distance, but those are open on the website now. And of course, our boat show events are live on the website, which is happening in October. Follow us on Instagram. I'm doing some more posts on there from the South Pacific, so if you want to see some pictures and what's going on there, do that. And last but not least, I've got a newsletter coming out from the quarterdeck, so if you're on there, I've got some more behind the scenes stuff happening on the quarterdeck. All right, that's it from me. Enjoy today's episode, and until next time, hold fast.
This season of the show is sponsored by Boat How To. Boat How To offers courses and advice for boaters and sailors who are interested in not just fixing and maintaining, but also understanding the technical systems on board their boats. They currently have 2 courses, one on marine electrical systems and one on marine diesel engine maintenance. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one out there who is a passionate and capable sailor with a slight confession, which is that I've always been okay with engines, but understanding electrics has been a bit of a hurdle over the years. I realized at some point in my career that this was a problem because anyone who wants to be self-sufficient on board a boat, particularly like me, who goes blue water sailing all the time, will find that safe ocean sailing and technical boat systems are inextricably linked. If a decade ago I had had a course like these that Nigel and Jan are offering, I'd probably have saved myself a lot of time, heartache, and possibly money. Because with education comes speed, confidence, empowerment, and a better understanding of when you need to ask for more help and when you can fix something yourself. So if you're interested in joining the 3,000 students from an impressive 85 different countries that have taken their Boat How To courses, check out boathowto.com. This episode is also sponsored by Weather Routing Inc. WRI, as it's more commonly known, has been providing 59 North with weather routing and forecasting services ever since Andy and Mia started the business. WRI is a bunch of lovely, super intelligent people who are passionate about weather. And I've also really enjoyed working with them over the years. And that's not just because they give great forecasting services, which they do, and they help you with departure windows, and that can be a real weight off your shoulders. But there's more to them than that. I think back to a trip I did with Mia last year. We were leaving from Bergen, and we had a forecast of about 48 hours of upwind sailing in 20 to 30 knots. And with the vomit very, very close to memory, I can tell you with great enthusiasm that that was not much fun. And I remember a day and a half in or so, WRI emailing and just checking in and saying something like, doesn't look like it was very comfortable over the last few days, hope all's well. And it really felt heartwarming to know that someone was keeping an eye out on us, and that someone to some level understood that it wasn't all just easy plain sailing. And that's just to say there is more to weather routing and weather routers than just weather. And WRI offers the full package. So if you're interested in learning more and possibly signing up, go to wriwx.com and tell them that 59 North sent you. That's Whiskey Romeo India Whiskey X-ray.com. You're listening to On the Wind, the podcast about offshore sailing. I'm your host, Nikki Henderson. Richard Clarke was raised on Toronto Island and first sailed at 4 years old. An impressive performance with Canadian youth sailing led him to compete in the Finn class in 4 consecutive Olympic Games with Team Canada, which opened the door to a wildly successful professional sailing career. Richard was part of a winning Volvo Round the World race crew, has broken the 24-hour sailing distance record 4 times, holds both the Transatlantic and the Transpac records. His accolades are jaw-dropping, and these are just a handful. Richard is such a great storyteller, and I was completely captivated listening to his tales during this recording. I'm sure you're going to absolutely love it too. So, Richard, can you describe where we are right now?
Oh, right now, sitting outside in lovely Antigua in 27 degrees Celsius weather, watching a squall just past. You know, looking at the very tall mast of some beautiful mega yachts, which at nighttime glow red with their masthead lights. So they're so tall that planes don't run into them, type of thing. And surrounded by, a beautiful spot, and delighted to be outside of my home of Canada, which is covered in snow at the moment.
So you've raced everything and sailed everything from a tiny, tiny little dinghy to presumably a boat with a red light on the top of its mast. Which do you prefer?
Well, the grassroots of the sport and development and starting in small boats, I can't turn back the time and I guess I could turn back time and go back there and race small boats again. But I'm inherently just so blessed to be able to sail some pretty high performance sporty boats that make ocean passages fly by and in the scope of what is out there sailing. And so, my preference certainly right now and for the last probably 20 years is that high performance mono hull, carbon fiber shell of a race boat with not much luxuries, but does sail pretty fast and fun and sporty. Would be my preference. But my dinghy roots go back to where I came from on my development, and there is a bunch of infrastructure and all those sorts of things and people that go sailing a larger boat. So it is a good reality check to go back and just have a bit of fun in a small dinghy and get wet and go do things yourself and not rely on a cast of many to get the sails up and down. And do you have one at home? No, I don't. No. It's I do have a dirty little secret, but I probably shouldn't go down there, that there is a 30-foot sailboat in the driveway that is in the need of some love. But problem is I'm far too busy to give it the loving it needs.
Daddy little secret, literally.
Yes, literally. It was at one point parked in a yard somewhere, so I couldn't see it, like a storage yard. And when we moved on the island I live on, we moved to a spot where I could actually keep it on the property. So it is there as a stain right now that reminds me to get off my backside and do something about it. And is cruising something you would want to do one day on that boat? Well, I live in a fantastic place of the world to cruise. I live on the west coast of Canada on an island called Salt Spring Island, surrounded by some of the most beautiful cruising grounds in the world. It is simply spectacular, and you could picnic across for a small anchorage in a little bay, half an hour or whatever, depends how you go in the wind, of course, everything else. But let's say a couple miles away, to go off and exploring up the west coast of Canada into some fantastic places with fjords and funnily enough, in some places decently warm water. The problem cruising around our neck of the woods is going for your morning dip is a little bit of it does wake you up, but it is a bit cold. So cruising does certainly appeals to my family as well. And some of the nicest vacations that we've been on have been chartering a sailboat through the Virgin Islands, or a little bit locally, borrowing some friends' boats when we can finagle a ride, or here or there. So it's on the list. It's just I need to slow down in my sailing career because
it's reassuring though. It's reassuring that someone who gets to race huge boats and flies all over the world, and your kind of resume is seriously impressive. It's reassuring you still kind of have the desire one day to do that, to kind of go back to grassroots sailing and just explore, like almost like a child.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of our sport, right? I wouldn't go cruising on the boats that I race on, and I wouldn't race on the boats that I'd love to cruise on. But we have that ability to sort of, I'm not saying it's cross-trading, but we have the scope within our sport to explore lots of different avenues. Let's just call it that, where, for me, going and racing and going cruising, although they are technically both sailing and both the same sport, are completely different. And there's nothing better than dropping the hook on a remote anchorage and cracking open a cold beverage and soaking in the glory that is all around you and what you can experience. And maybe it's also part of who I am. We live remotely, and I live on an island on a couple of acres, and I can barely see my neighbors, and the sun goes down and I can barely see lights of a few houses. And maybe that's what I gravitate to and enjoy, a bit of seclusion, and sailing and exploring is like that same experience, just with a change of scenery and more things to explore and experience.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like racing and cruising, and they're almost incomparable. But the people who do them are probably much more alike than one or the other tends to admit, in terms of your passion for the water and for sailing.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, for sure, there's massive similarities there. It's just, there's the love for switching off that engine and sailing and getting from A to B. And there's just a difference in how fast and what is the urgency to get there. And
what do you love about sailing? Like, why do you sail for your work?
Well, I think you go back to what we've been talking about, the adventure side of things. And that's particularly, if you would ask me, do I prefer sailing offshore or inshore? I would say offshore, because it adds that component of an adventure. It adds that component of having to look not forward as in I'm looking forward to this, but look outside. Let's say your immediate windward leeward race course of a mile, and sure, you're always looking at geography and the odd cloud, but now you're really, as far as offshore planning and looking and going, ooh, is that cloud a thing? And is that cloud going to pass one side of the other of us? And how is that going to affect the sails that I have up in the course that I want to sail? And am I going to have to make a change? And it's that'll go back to tall ship times. And that's always been the case. And we can say that today we have extensive weather modeling and satellite imaging to help us prepare for these things. But in the end of the day, you're still having to use your eyes, and you're still having to use your experience. And that hasn't changed over the centuries. And that's part of I love that side of it, and the adventuresome and trying to coexist with Mother Nature. I'm never going to say, conquer or no, but to be able to work within the environment and the winds and the clouds and the nature and the currents and the waves and everything else. And that side of it, I really enjoy. And what I also really enjoy, and I was saying this to somebody lately, was that the sport continues to challenge, and we continue to learn, and we continue, like, there's not a day goes by and you think of my years and years of sailing, and 56 years old, that I know everything by now, and I still learn every day. And that in itself is my biggest joy, to continue to learn and develop as a sailor as it continues to challenge me.
Yeah, it's like a very humbling environment. It teaches you both how to experience joy and also what you don't know. You learn what you don't know.
Yeah. And the sport and technology and everything is still evolving, and that's a fun part of it. But it's also, like you said, that humility and to learn and evolve and to be open and not to be conceited and overconfident, because once you're overconfident, I can't tell you how many times that's come to smack you on the backside.
I was about to ask, I'm like, this is just luring me in. Do you remember a moment where you learned not to be overconfident?
Well, I think there's certainly many moments where I wouldn't say it was overconfidence. It's more like just being ill prepared. Remember the early days, we were sailing a Volvo 70, and one of the first Volvo 70s to be launched after the race around the world, the Volvo Ocean Race at the time, now called the Ocean Race, had evolved from the 60s to the 70s. And it's a new design with a canting keel and dagger boards and all sorts of sporty things. And we launched the boat in Australia, and to train, we decided that, well, why don't we just sail this boat from Australia to Spain? And we were going to stop in Rio along the way. So it was
some solid training.
It was a very ambitious training goal. And we set off from Australia with the goal of going around the Horn to Rio. And we made it as far as Auckland before we had to actually say, okay, we have some work to do. Things are the boat was actually leaking like a sieve, which really was step one. So we actually pulled into Auckland and basically got out the silicone and went to town for a while. But time was ticking, and Southern Ocean passages usually don't happen too far past March. And it was already in March, and we're like, we need to get out of here because time is ticking. So we kind of patched this boat together, brand new design, like I said, and build, and then went through the Southern Ocean believing that it was a good idea. And that was an issue because we got into some strife in as close to the middle of nowhere, almost at Point Nemo, which is a spot where apparently the people on the space station are the closest humans to you.
We had to go to space to actually test that out.
Yes, I think it'd be a good idea. But we ended up in about 30 plus knots of breeze running downwind. And of course, these things happen in the middle of the night, and just too much sail up and not being able to reef because of some, not to get too technical, but the way that the square top main was just in the battens, everything was binding, and we just couldn't put a reef in. So we were trying to put a reef in, and we came up with all sorts of interesting ideas upon how we could unload the sail plan. And the last idea was, well, we'll just find the biggest wave we could find and go surfing down that at maximum speed, and maybe easing the mainsail so it might flap a bit, might unload the main and have it come down so we could put a reef in. And fortunately, when we unloaded the main and went down a very large Southern Ocean wave, the boat rocked up on its windward chine, and if you can imagine being like a skier or a snowboarder or a surfer, and it just caught on that windward chine, and we went into a massive, and I don't even know if it's a politically correct term anymore, but a Chinese jibe, where
a really messy
an
thing.
Unintentional jibe, let's just call it, and we looked at the data afterwards, and we augured in doing 36 and a half knots of boat speed. We went to 90 degrees of heel. So we actually did put the mast in the water on a 70-foot boat. Canting keel now at this point, which is supposed to be to windward acting to stability, is to leeward, helping the boat tip over. And then, of course, the sail plan's all backed against the rig and the main against the runners. And we tore all the stanchions off the one side of the boat that went into the water. We had, at that point, the rules of the race, you could stack all your sails on the windward side, so they're all in the water. And I remember as clear as day, and it's funny, right? In the middle of the night, it was pitch black, but when sort of disaster strikes, it actually seemed quite bright. And I remember looking around, is everybody okay? And, sort of counting heads. And I looked back at Stu Bannatyne, who was driving. And Stu was in the water, hanging on to the wheel for dear life. There's two wheels on this boat near the edges. And he was up to his neck in water, hanging on to the wheel. So I went back to help him out. And said, "You okay, Stu?" And he's a Kiwi and very, he's the king of the Southern Ocean. He's done more laps than most people I know of the planet. And he said in a very sort of deadpan Kiwi drawl, he said, "Richard, I'm not very comfortable right now." And it turned out that he had actually clipped his tether from his life jacket. He clipped his tether onto the windward lifeline as opposed to clipping it onto the jack line or somewhere else. And because the stanchions had all ripped off and the lifeline was in the water and that side of the boat's in the water and the stack of sails, he was actually getting pulled under the water by the lifeline and the stack of sails on it. So I actually ended up, to keep the story not too long, I had to get into the water with him with my knife out to try and cut his tether around his belly button to cut him out of the ocean. So yeah, back to, was it overconfident? Yeah. Were we overconfident because we believed we could actually sail this unproven boat through the most dangerous conditions and place in the planet and achieve it without some sort of
just pausing for an airplane?
But yeah, could we achieve that feat without suffering something as catastrophic as we did? Was naive for sure. And yeah, after that, still, more than almost 2,000 miles from the Horn, we licked our wounds and limped our way. And I remember actually looking quite fondly at the Falkland Islands and thought, maybe that's a nice place to stop. And
Which, by the way, no one does.
Exactly. And Barra Becking, who was our skipper, said no, because he knew, I think, if we stopped at the Falklands, we may never leave. When we got the thing to Rio, and then we got most of the repairs done, and then eventually got to Spain and learned and got better, obviously, at understanding this boat and prepared ourselves for the race. But yeah.
So I think that obviously the average Joe doesn't experience a wake-up call quite that extreme, but a lot of offshore sailors are going to find themselves in situations where they're like, oh, wow, we didn't prepare enough, or we didn't do the right things, or we really shouldn't be here. And I'm always fascinated to know, like, how did you recover? Like in the aftermath, in the next 24 hours or immediately, once you knew everyone was alive and the boat wasn't going to sink in the spot and the mast was still up. Do you debrief? Does everyone just like go to bed and, pass out because they're exhausted?
We had a timeout. And because it wasn't a race, we had the luxury of a timeout. If you were racing, there would have been a lot more, I'm not going to say franticness, but sometimes when you are racing and things go wrong, it always feels like that if you're doing a race and you have a mishap like this, a wipeout or a broken sail or having some issues, it feels like time stops. And you're like, oh, it was 45 minutes for sure that we were on our side. And you look back later at the tracker or the data and you realize it was only 10 minutes, but it feels like an eternity because we just think the fleet is just sailing away from you and your results. But because this was a delivery, we had the luxury of just getting the boat on its feet, getting the sails that were in the water out of the water. We had a stay sail up. We had to cut the main down as well, by the way. That's part of the story. I had to send somebody up the rig. But we got it to the point where we had a very small sail plan, that the boat was very under control. And we plodded along and we just took the evening off. Got up in the morning when the lights came on. And it actually took us all of the next day to just poke away at repairing the boat and getting it to a point where we could slowly hoist more sails and put more power into it and make some more speed but for sure, very I guess once bitten twice shy phrase.
Yeah,
that we just went a lot more carefully from there, and just I think it took us probably another 4 days before we had the courage to put a spinnaker up again.
And I think something offshore racing teaches you in particular is that wasting time blaming anyone for a problem is probably not a great use of time, but also trying to figure out why something went wrong so that you don't repeat the situation is important. In your career, I guess, I'm using this as kind of a liftoff, but like, how have you seen people navigate that line well?
Well, it goes back to what I love about the sport and the learning and always being open. And I think the most successful and longest tenured sailors I know have a similar attitude to myself, of that you just never know everything, and you are never the smartest person in the room. And maybe myself in particular, who is usually a team leader, a watch captain, a person in charge of all my programs, I am in no way am I a dictator. And I think those days, and they obviously still exist, of those skippers that just, get back there and yell and scream at everybody, and you make everyone else just walk on eggshells and not contribute. Is you are on a team of individuals, and to grow as a leader or to grow as a sailor is to learn from everybody around you. Obviously there's teaching involved, and there is as a leader, you instruct and teach and guide, but there's usually a few tidbits out there that people have knowledge that you don't, that you can learn from. And it doesn't make you a worse leader. In my mind, it makes you a better leader, because everybody's more invested. Everyone's more involved. Everybody is more, they have more skin in the game. And that is probably what my biggest lesson, and maybe it's my humble Canadianism or something around there lurks out all the time. But it's to grow as a leader, you have to rely on others, and that's the biggest part of it.
Have you always been a leader, or always thought you would be a leader?
I definitely, in my early days of offshore sailing, was not a leader. I went through the Olympic pathway and small boats, dinghies, sailing, day sailing, never sailing on a boat where I couldn't see land. And I had the opportunity through one of my Olympic programs where it's good things in life and advancement, as much as we would love to believe can happen solely on ability. It's a lot of times who you know and who you get introduced to, and opportunities you get presented, or doors that might open for you one way or another for any reason.
Or reputation that you might take with you.
Exactly. And on that note, I had a reputation of just in the fin that I was sailing, of just being very fit and very tough. And I had, through that, was recommended to this Volvo team that had one space available for a tryout. So at the end of my 2000 Olympics, I went to Fremantle, Australia, for another interesting through the Southern Ocean inexperienced trial phase. But I was surrounded by a bunch of great Volvo Ocean Race sailors who had done a few laps of the planet.
So is this like your first ever sail on a big boat?
Been on a big boat. We were sailing a first day in my tryout, and I'm sitting on the stack of sails just trying to get my bearings and understanding a boat with, at that point, of course, the fin had one sail, and a boat that has all these sails and all these things and people, and I don't know anybody, and they're all legends of the sport. And this guy trimming the asymmetric spinnaker is like, "Hey, new guy, can you?" And I don't even know if I can say this on the record. We'll have to maybe edit it out. But can you tighten the downfucker? And I was like, "What is that?" And I get to the pit, which I assume where you adjust things, and I look at all these labels, masthead, halyard, and all these things, and I get to this jammer that's actually labeled the DF, and I put on the winch and I grind it on, and the guy's like, "That's good." I was like, "What did I just do?" It turns out it's like the fore guy for the spinnaker pull, but because there's code zeros involved, what we would call a tack line nowadays. And so I didn't know anything, and I think anything when you get an opportunity where you don't know anything and you are the low person on the totem pole, is to have that just can-do attitude. First to show up, last to leave. We'd have these morning meetings, and we're preparing to do this 7-day ocean passage from Fremantle, Australia to Auckland, and we're going to go due south through the Southern Ocean for a few days, and then go due north up to Auckland. And we're preparing, and there's a lot to do to the boats that we were using. They were secondhand boats, and there was a bit of work to be done. And there would be morning meetings, like we have to do service the hydraulics. I'd be sitting on my hands because I understand what a hydraulic is, but I don't understand hoses and the system and everything else. And there's electronics, and there was rigging to be done and splicing and whatever. But there was someone said on the daily job list. We need someone to service the head. So look around, no hands go up. My hand will shoot up. So I became like the classic guy that was going to do all the less unskilled, dirty jobs. So I got involved with that, super keen attitude, got involved with the food program because I liked food and anything that I could less skill that needed help. And we trundled off to the Southern Ocean and the first night offshore. And I was being trialed as a driver trimmer. The first night offshore, I get invited back for a turn at the helm. And the helmsman says to me, okay, Richard, I'm doing about 68 apparent, 130 true wind angle.
Just about.
Let's say like 120 heading or something, and gives me all these information. I get back to the wheel. I'm like, what was he saying? There's all these numbers up there on these instruments. And the first one I came to was the apparent. I'm like, oh, okay. Yes. In the 60s. Oh, okay. That's good. I drive into that a little bit and I go surfing down a wave. And of course the apparent goes forward as the boat accelerates. So I bear away and I'll probably bear away too much. And then I'm like, oh, it's going aft. So then I head up a lot and I'm like, oh, too high. So I spent about probably 20 minutes going, oh, too low. Oh, too high. Oh, too low. Oh, too high. And then of course, eventually I got too high and wiped the boat out and blew up the spinnaker, and that was bad.
Good trial, going well. So you knew that was bad.
That was bad. Yes, it was bad. I was relieved promptly after and said that I had done enough damage for one night. And the next day I was grinding. And like I said, I was a bit of a beast back then, so grinding away. They were jib reaching at some point because we had to reach to get down south. And one of the crew passes me up the cooking pot and says, Richard, I'm going to make lunch. Can you clean the pot out? And I'm sitting there and there's water everywhere. And I kind of like get the pot, which is those ports of you almost use like a pressure cooker type pot where you could like latch the lid on. It was quite big and heavy. And I looked in and we weren't eating well yet because of your first day offshore. You're not quite acclimatized. And we actually didn't have the freeze dried we had wasn't quite palatable. It wasn't very nice. And it was quite full. So I went to clean the pot.
We should blame the provisioner for that, right?
Yeah, maybe that too. I could only work with what I had at the time, of course. So I sloshed up some water and I gave it a little sort of swirl, and I went to kind of chuck the contents out.
Uh-oh.
And of course, my cold, wet hands and the contents and the pot went.
Oh no, the pot too.
Over the side. Yeah, so in 12 hours, I'd blown up everyone's favorite small reaching spinnaker and tossed our only way at that point to make food over the side. And when I knew, so the first thing I do is put my head in my hands. I'm like, this is really bad. What have I done? I feel really poorly right now. The first thing I hear is absolute hysterical laughter. No one's yelling at me. No one's pointing and saying, what have you done, you idiot? They are just, you're not going to believe what just happened. And like off watch, you're getting woken up. Everyone's laughing hard. So I had to fix this. And like I said, being involved in the food program, I kind of put my hand up and went, okay, I'll be back. I went down below. And what saved us was the kettle. Because freeze-dried food is just hot water and freeze-dried. So I get the kettle going. And then I just went looking around for a suitable container. And because it was a bit wet and wild, there was a bit of water down below. And I think probably the drifted by my feet and a little bit of the bilge water was the bucket. So I went,
not the bucket.
Not the bucket, a bucket. Let's just say the bilge bucket. And that's what I made the food out of. And came up with a little fun things of like using the little foil packaging. There's a little insulated top with a bit of bungee from the rigging kit, and got it so we could remove it and clean it quite well. And we actually ended up to close the loop of the story. By the time I got to Auckland, I figured out how to drive a boat. I got offered a contract to do the race. So I made the team, and I had a performance. My contribution early days to performance of offshore sailing was no more heavy pressure cooker, and we made food. I was the first person to make food out of a non-metal container for our freeze-dried food.
God, you trendsetter.
There you go.
So you basically turned what was a disaster after a disaster into, you probably had the reputation as the comedian on board and the you'll fix anything on board with the improper tools.
Yeah, more or less. More or less. Obviously, there's not a lot I could fix with some of my knowledge, but yeah, just more or less be a person that can be relied upon in a bit of a unforeseeable incident, and certainly, yeah, just somebody that can adapt if needed, which. We talk about MacGyvering all sorts of things, if there's a term people understand.
I think they do, yeah.
Yeah. Fixing things on the fly. That's the one thing, right? We get back to the adventure side of the sport. Whether you are just going for a passage on your own, or whether you're in a race, whether you're trying to, go there quickly or slowly, whatever the case may be, things do happen. It is, there are boats. It is, no matter how much maintenance and preparation that you do before a passage, things can still break and fatigue that are unforeseen. It's how you adapt and fix things. And what do you have with you that you can use? I had this really cool trip. We did a transatlantic race last year from the Canaries to Grenada, and
what were you sailing?
52. A boat called the Pac 52, a boat called Warrior One, and we'd had a bunch of success with that program. And yeah, we'd had done races like the Fastnet the year before where it blew 50 and our engine came off its mounts, and our water maker was part of that system, and we couldn't actually make water because we tried to make our intake for the water maker came through the sail drive, but because the engine was off its mounts, there was something with the alignment and the pickup couldn't happen. So we're like, well, and I'm very happy to help, but I'm also very surrounded by qualified individuals who know it's like having an engineer on your boat, right? That know all the internal systems, the whether it's the electronics or the engine, charging the batteries, all those things. And not to put two stories into one, but during that Fastnet race when the water maker couldn't pick up, I remember him coming out of the deck with a hose, basically like, I got to put this in something to get water. Can you slow the boat down? I'm like, I'm not going to slow the boat down.
Classic.
But he's like, well, if we don't slow the boat down, we're not going to make water. And that particular boat had water ballast. So I was like, well, why don't you just stick it in the water ballast tank? So as much as I can't come up with all the ideas, I was like, well, there's a whole tank of water right there. So we sort of put it through the breather, exit 2 of the water ballast tank and use water that way to make water, which was all good until we wasn't enough wind to have the ballast in, and he wanted me to fill a ballast tank so we could make water. So I was like, well, how much you got to put in there? But on this transatlantic race, the temperature regulator module for our alternator went. Well, the alternator went first, so we put the spare alternator on, and then understanding why the first alternator fried, we understood that it wasn't regulating itself. And so the boat captain used a digital thermometer. So every time we charged, the poor guy had to engine cover off every few minutes, making sure the temperature wasn't. If the temperature started to get spiky, to turn down the.
And that was obviously for your high class cooking that you had the digital thermometer with you.
I don't understand. The only reason I have one at home is for my pizza oven, and we didn't have one of those on the boat. So why we actually had a digital thermometer? Well, the one was digital. Those infrared, the laser ones, and so that was all fine until the thermometer started to lose battery, and it was a rechargeable one or something, and we didn't have the right bit. And so one of the best MacGyver situations was he took a bunch of double A's and kind of put them in column or in line or something, and he found a way to So not only you get one problem, you solve that, you get a second problem that you try to do to solve the first problem, and it sort of spirals along until you finally get the solution that tackles it all.
It's funny. It's like these stories. It brings to light kind of a characteristic, I think, of sailing teams where you've got to have the engineers, like you've got to have the geniuses, right? Who understand what a regulator is or how to wire up a new battery bank or whatever. But you also have to have these kind of creative, almost like artistic souls who can come at that problem and come at it from a completely like non-engineering focused way. And I think that that's almost like the build of a great sailor, would you say? Is like, or what do you think a great sort of sailing team is made up of?
Well, I think the great sailing team is made up of the sum of its parts. And it's no different. I equate sailing in a way to any professional sports team, basketball, I could say hockey because we're Canadian, but, football, depending which football that it might be. But you have players and you have positions, and then you actually have plays. And a sailing team is very much the same sort of component. We're made up of a team of individuals who all have specific skills, and those specific skills lead them to a specific position, just like you would be a forward or a defenseman in hockey or a goalie. We have bowmen, we have grinders, we have trimmers, we have navigators, we have strategists, tacticians, drivers. You have, and then that's just your one position. And then within that, you might have your riggers and your sailmakers and your boat builders. And like you said, your engineers and your system specialists. And a best team is a team where you have diversity amongst the members. And what does diversity lead to? Diversity leads to support. Diversity leads to problem solving. And then you add to the component that it's also all well and good while we're sitting here on land or at the dock trying to support each other, maybe problems that we might find on a day of sailing. But when you're out there on the ocean and the way that we do ocean racing, you get fatigued pretty quickly. Like we're about to head off on a 600-mile race where I'm really hoping I get 4 to 6 hours of sleep over 2.5 days. Because it's a very challenging course. I'm just, as being part of someone that helps decide what sails we put up and where we go, and there's all these islands around that I need to be awake a lot of the time. So you get very fatigued. And if there's a problem that happens, at some points in this race, I'm not going to be the most helpful person.
Right.
To necessarily help solve some of the stuff. And that's where it's great to have backup and redundancy of not only what you bring with you, but who you bring with you. And that makes up the best teams that I've been on, where there's just so much strength through all those positions. And again, like I said, not just the one position of being, whether you're a bowman or a trimmer or anything else, but then you bring your secondary set of skills that help through those problems that we've been talking about. Are you just a sailmaker? I'm not saying just a sailmaker, but are you a sailmaker that when that sail gets ripped, and sail damage is probably one of the most likely things that we all experience. And whether it's a little oopsie when you have too much canvas up, too big a sail, and you end up on your side and that sail flaps itself to hopefully not too many pieces that you can repair it.
Yep.
But yeah, frequently we don't have a sailing machine. There was an Inno Noir did the Transatlantic, and they had some problems blowing their spinnakers up quite frequently, and they were actually, but there's no way, we don't have sewing machines on board, and having to hand stitch sails back together just to get another one in the sky, got to the point where they didn't have much backup and redundancy anymore because they've been tearing so many sails. And that sailmaker on board was an invaluable to just not only them finishing the race, but I think they came second or third or something. And those stories, so yeah, sails is one of those things that you can happen, because that can happen just in a simple maneuver where a left tape gets pulled off trying to put a new jib up the forestay, or maybe you're tucking in a reef and the webbing gets pulled out. It could be, sails are one of those things that, they live a hard life, and it's great to have a good sailmaker on board.
I wish my team of somewhat amateurs could hear you talk, because the time they spend beating themselves up when they make significantly smaller mistakes than you're making, is huge. And I spent a long time telling them, it's not about the mistake, it's about how we move forward from it.
Yeah. It's just an awesome point, because everyone thinks that it could be in any number of ways that a perfect sailing race is performing perfectly. And actually, the best sailing race, there's no such thing as a perfect sailing race. It's the team that made the least amount of mistakes. And because mistakes will happen in any number of ways, and some of them can be a lot more glaring than others. We're talking about a litany of mistakes or damages or adventurous breakages in through various parts of races. But they can be tactical and strategical and even navigational. Well, navigational mistakes usually come with a bit of a bump, but I could have just chosen, as the person that's in charge of navigating around a cloud. I could do that incorrectly. And yeah, it doesn't sound as dramatic a story, but it could be a race, a moment in the race where there was a mistake. And like you said, it's no one berates anybody for it. The best teams just go, okay, how do we get ourselves out of this? And whatever this could be, it's adapt and move on.
And did you ever play any other sports?
I played rugby.
No way.
I played rugby for 11 years through high school and university. And that's why my nose is not as straight as it once was. And actually, my last broken nose, back to you, Richard, you have so many stories about crazy tall sailing tails. I fell through a hatch. Again, and maybe because my guard is down, or no, I can see my guard's down on deliveries, but we were doing a race team delivery on a Volvo 70 from Newport, Rhode Island to West Palm Beach, Florida. And we were off of Cape Hatteras and the wind against Gulf Stream, and it was pretty crazy. And we actually kept having steering gear failure. First time it was the chain over the sprocket of the wheel, and the next one was the tie rod that joins the two rudders together. It's a twin rudder boat. And when the tie rod went, we wiped out, inadvertently jibed, and it was okay. Like everything at that point was just fine. And there was this little hatch in between the wheels in the cockpit, and one of the crew opened that hatch and went down and started to speak quite, I don't know if it was panicky, but I heard something panicky, although it was kind of a mumbly panic and I wasn't quite sure. And because I was trimming the main at the time and quite close to this hatch, I thought, I should put my ear or my head down close to the hatch so I could hear what he's saying and understand if we're sinking or something. And on my way back there, I think a wave hit the boat and I tripped and I fell from a mostly standing position and put my hand out to arrest my fall, but what did it find but the middle of the open hatch? And what caught the deck was my face and my nose. And broke my nose and actually had a pretty severe gash that required stitches on my head, and we were a couple 100 and something miles off the coast, and it was
made a right old mess of the deck.
Oh, right old mess of the deck. People were like, "Oh my gosh, I could see your skull," things like that, and tall sailing tales. But yeah, there was certainly blood everywhere, as a head wound does. And I kind of sat on my haunches and went, "I'm okay." And everyone looked at me and went, "No, you're not. Sit down there and don't move," because I felt like a right old fool.
And in a true Canadian way, you hurt yourself and then said, "Sorry."
No, there was a sorry there. Sorry, guys. I got down below and got stabilized, and there were all these little whispers. And again, I'm part of the sort of leadership team, and I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?" And then they're like, "We're just deciding we should actually take you to shore, or should we continue the next day and a half or so, 2 days down to where we were going." And they actually elected to take me to shore, which in hindsight wasn't needed, because when I got to the hospital 13 hours after the incident, the ER doctor did not actually want to put a stitch in my head because they were worried about infection being that old of an injury. And actually the reason I don't have a worse scar, although I had plenty of wrinkles in my old face. So it's actually
I'm actually trying to look for the scar
hidden.
now.
It goes this way or that way. I can't remember. It's up here somewhere. Is that the steri strips that we had in our onboard medical kit held the wound together enough that that's ultimately what stopped me from being Scarface.
Right, and you're probably quite happy they didn't use a needle and thread right that close to your eyes.
Well, and in some historical stitching that I've done offshore, we are not neat either, and we'll as much as we believe that we are helping someone's cause by stitching. I had to stitch someone's eye above. They had the same thing, a big gash over one of their eyebrows. So I was on the medic side. So me and another guy both had turns, like who could make a better stitch, and we both were not very good. And the poor guy has quite a scar to this day. And so thankful steri strips and glue are a lot better to have in your medical kit than an actually suture kit.
So do you think that your rugby career gave you that kind of hard not reputation, but you said like when you joined the Volvo team that you were said that as a Finn sailor you were kind of tough. Like, do you think that the cross sport experience was useful?
Is it cross sport? Is it cultural? Being Canadian? Is it my upbringing and my parents? I couldn't probably put a finger on it. Did I gravitate to rugby because I was inherently that makeup of a human, or did rugby make me the makeup of the human that I am now? It's chicken or the egg question, I guess. And I would say partly of it. I think partly playing rugby, the sport is a hard sport. There is a bit of discomfort and pain involved with it. And did that make my tolerance for pain and discomfort higher than if I had not played the game? Potentially. There's a good argument there for it.
It's certainly a sport that creates some excellent leaders and team players.
Right. I was, and again, back to the chicken and egg thing. I was the captain of my rugby team for the last 3 years, became a leader of that squad as well, although we weren't a very good team, but we did have a lot of fun. And I'm not sure which came first. There's a comfort there to leadership, for sure. That if I haven't been a leader in many things throughout my life, would the comfort that I have now be there? I'm not sure. I think you get bred and you evolve and you hopefully flourish in a pathway. And it doesn't, it's me, it's leadership, it's tactics, it's strategy, it's managing teams. I really love that sort of thing, but it doesn't have to be that way for everybody. And actually, for me, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, well, what's the biggest difference? Your Olympic programs, I never won a medal. I've been to the Olympics 5 times, and I never won a medal. And that's a.
Oh, I'm sorry, because that's quite tough.
Mentally, yes. And for a lot of my life, I thought that identified who I was. And that's not being a success. It was actually in my mind being a failure. But yet, since my Olympic campaigns, I've had a very, very successful sailing career. But I've had a very successful career within teams and leading teams. And I think that comes back to what we talked about earlier about what the best teams are, surrounded by really qualified people. What best leaders are: leaders that listen, and leaders that can get the most out of their team mates, not only through elevating them to an ability that maybe they didn't even know they had, but also using them to support yourself and their strengths to support maybe what could be your weaknesses. And I think that's where I've evolved as a leader and as a sailor, is to be, and then why I am successful now is because I can be very successful within a team. But I think if I look back of the soul of who I am is being the only person on that team, which I was during my Olympic sailing when I was sailing the Finn. For me, it was it was just too much. It was too much.
Or perhaps it just wasn't the stage in which you were meant to shine. If you had been super successful in the Olympics, perhaps you wouldn't have jumped on the big boat circuit. Perhaps that would have been enough.
Potentially. Although you're seeing more and more crossover from successful Olympians into successful bigger boat sailing, but may or may not be offshore. But if you go look at the America's Cup and you look at other boats that are outside the Olympic arena. And even we can go into Etchells and J70s, and we can look at a lot of Olympians that are having good success in that. So a pathway to success can be the Olympics, but certainly anybody listening here doesn't have to be. There are many ways to be successful, or to be successful in sailing, or to be part of a successful sailing team. And whether it's you've gone through the junior sailing route into the Olympic pathway, or you've gone through the junior sailing route or not with your local club, and you're doing the Wednesday night big boat series, and that got you into something, and someone went, "Oh, that's what's the biggest thing is just like I said, it's attitude and work ethic, and the skills will come through just reps." But I actually had a really, really interesting experience once with a high performance team, and I was brought in to coach and lead the Bermuda Youth America's Cup team for the America's Cup in Bermuda. What was that, 2017 or something around those dates? We could get them wrong.
Within the last 10 years.
Yeah, it was in Bermuda, and I was brought in. And this was Bermuda is an island nation of 60 some odd thousand people. It's really not a very large population. And the high performance sailing culture, yes, I sent a few people to the Olympics, and I'm certainly not going to try and offend any Bermudians right now. It's a great sailing nation surrounded by water. It's got a great sailing heritage. But at the peak of high performance, they don't necessarily have a pathway that's feeding into it. So being brought in for this Youth America's Cup program that was going to be sailed in the AC-75, a foiling boat with a wing sail. And we had these tryouts, and it's a fascinating long story in itself, but we had 30-something sailors that we were trying out, and we could try them out on some beach cats that we had, and some lasers, and maybe some Vipers we had, and so small little sailboats, whether they were small keel boats with 2 people in it, or dinghies or little beach catamarans. And we sort of tried out, and we picked a little handful that seemed to have potential, but the skill level wasn't what it would needed to be to sail these high performance foiling catamarans. And then we actually went, well, we need some size. These sailors are all small. What are we going to do about size? And someone came up with the idea, well, let's put it out to the general public and see who wants to try out. So we put ads in the newspaper and on social media and various websites. And we had 100 non-sailors try out for this team.
Awesome. Which
was an incredibly daunting task when I said, well, how are we going to select from 100 candidates? And it came up with this interesting, fitness. That's we'll do a fitness evaluation. It involves maybe the skills that we're looking at. So we had an agility and a bit of an erg test. We sort of ended up being like a 6-minute test that involved like a grinding on a top handle on a winch that told us weighted sled on the rope, and then some agility, and then an erg for 500 meters, and there's a hiking bench because they're
take note anyone who's looking for crew.
Yeah, it was realistic. And then at the end of that, I said, well, what are we looking for too? Well, we're looking for fast learners because they have no sailing experience. So then we took them because I want to also see who can problem solve under duress. So once they're at max heart rate, we stuck them in a room with a psychologist. They had to do like a problem solving question to see who could do it. So that helped. And then we did leadership games. And one of the simple games was, my wife was really good at coming up with these ideas. She said, well, take 11 placemats and put them in a line and drive them in groups of 10 and get 5 on one side, 5 on the other side with 1 vacant placemat in the middle. And tell them to switch sides, moving one person at a time and not stepping on the ground. Go. And the first check for me was, because they all stand there and they're kind of looking over each other's shoulders, and each individual is trying to problem solve this problem, which is slightly complex, but once you get it, it's quite easy. It just takes a little lateral thinking. The first person that put their hand up and said, can I step off my placemat for a sec and just look? They got a little tick on my... Look, because it's you're looking for
big picture.
So to complete this long story, we selected 7 non-sailors. So we have these sailors that don't have a high performance background in the boats that we're trying to actually teach them to sail, and these 7 non-sailors, more or less. I think I got my math wrong, but anyways, that had never sailed before. And it was a hugely daunting task. And I went to my executive board and said, well, what is the goal here? What do you want from this team? And they said, well, we'd like them to be somewhat respectable and not dangerous. Okay, I think I can achieve that.
We should swap jobs for a while, because you would like my job.
Well, you should. The long story of the story is we got them sailing on these NACRA 17s. We had 4 of them. We rotated them through. 27 days later, the sailors had to go off because we were getting our new GC32 coming in that we're going to use as a training platform, a 32-foot foiling catamaran. And I took the non-sailors just on their own with no sailors, and I took them sailing on their own, like 2 of them in each NACRA 17. I put 4 marks, a little square on the sounder mute, and said, just keep inside the playground. I don't want to chase cats all over the place. Just stay in there. And after, I think, 15, 20 minutes, I had my first team double trapezing with the spinnaker up flying a hull. They'd never driven a boat in their life. And the lesson to me was that high performance skill is not as hard to teach as you think. What is harder, and if you think about it in terms of a squad, and sorry to get so sporty on you on this, but a high performance team has 2 components: high performance culture and high performance skill. And going into this whole thing, I thought culture was easy because that's who I am. I believe I wreak high performance culture as I go into any program. I just believe that this is the way, just follow my lead, and will be high performance culture. And I thought with this group, like I said, looking at the sailors and the athletes, like, how are we going to get them good enough? And the skill came fast. The culture, I don't think I got the culture of that team. Sure, it was very high performance, and sure, it was very good. And again, no offense to anybody on that program, but it never got quite to the level that I wanted.
And high performance culture, what are you looking for?
The biggest thing for high performance culture for me is accountability. And if we go back to the conversations that we had, it's like you have the skills, you bring it to this team, but are you completely reliable and accountable to bring that skill every single day and to look after? Because again, if we think about preparation, we think about, even as we're preparing for this 600-mile race that's going to happen, it's impossible for one person to oversee the preparation in every single area. So we have people that are going to be in charge of preparing the sails. We have people that are in charge of preparing the food. We have people in charge of, preparing, making sure the rigging and the splicing and everything, making sure we have enough winch handles and deck gear. And the list is endlessly long and long if you actually put this whole thing in a spreadsheet. So we have to rely on everybody within their department to get
and
that.
have trust
and
that
you're,
they're going to do it.
And you're accountable. And they're accountable to make sure that their area is up to the level of the team. I'm not saying every team has the same level. Is the equipment in your area suitable to make the race? Is the equipment and at a race winning level? It can vary in any number of ways. But that sort of accountability and, like you said, trust and appreciation and effort and attitude. There's so many parts of it. But yeah, for some reason, the first thing is just that accountability. Like, are you, can you trust and can you rely on? And even at that, mistakes happen. It was funny enough with this particular program, Summer Storm, that I'm racing this race with. We did a warm up before the Bermuda race, and we actually left without spoons. Speaking of little things you can forget that you think. We went to make the first free, and luckily it was just an overnight. We were only going to have 2 free-starred meals.
Everyone's like, "Don't worry, this guy threw a pot over the side once, so he's going to figure it out."
And that was one of those things that I wasn't involved with the food program, but I was. If you get, we were sort of I was involved with the food program, and the forecast was really light, so we started saying, "Well, what can we sort of take off the boat?" And what happened is that somebody took off. I didn't go through my area. Is ultimately what happened, and but it's amazing what you can make a spoon out of if you really have to, when you're hungry. And we ended up cutting spoons out of a water bottle, making little plastic they were pretty flexible, but they worked. Sunglasses, apparently, I've also known people that eat with sunglasses. It can be an emergency spoon, apparently.
But you probably want to keep the sunglasses intact for sunglass work.
Yeah, usually.
Make sure you eat your dinner in the
Do
dark.
I always bring an emergency backup pair? Yeah, if we think about what you can and cannot bring, we're all quite, if I have that sort of one, maybe a slight pet peeve and / sort of lead by example, personal pride thing. I pride myself in the person that has the smallest bag going on the boat. So
we all have the bag fear and the bag pride. They both they go hand in hand.
So yes, I have big bag pride, and but I do sneak in an emergency backup sunglasses because how many times have we been offshore where you've lost your sunglasses? Not many, but enough.
Well, Richard, I think that's kind of a good way to end it. Like, what can you build a spoon out of? But before I kind of wrap this up, I would love to know your thoughts. I think specifically, maybe some advice to share. I think there's a lot of, and perhaps this is a personal question too. There's a lot of advice given to people who want to get into professional sailing, young people, when it comes to coming with an extra skill. So they come with sail making or they come with engineering. We've talked about this a lot. There's very little talked about what if you come with more of an interest in your background in leadership and teamwork. I mean, assuming that the sailing skill is there. What advice would you give to someone in that position? Is there a space for them?
No, very much so. And if you look at myself, I would sort of come along through that skill set of I'm not a sailmaker, I'm not a rigger, although I wouldn't rely on my splice. I wouldn't trust it. I've had to splice a few times. I'm like, oh no, please. Maybe make it on like a coat rack as opposed to a runner tail or something. Maybe less reliable. It looks
Richard's
good.
coat racks are great, by the way, everyone.
Yes. And I don't even know if we have coat racks, but the first thing came to mind. If you come with the leadership tech, you're going to be a tactician, watch captain, team leader type thing, and you can start that at the club level. And I started at the club level. Probably the first boat I did tactics on outside of fit of doing it for myself was on a J35 out of the Royal Victoria Yacht Club. And was I lucky, or was I lucky to get that job or that position? Let's say, not a job at that time, it was amateur. Was I lucky to get that, or did I get that because I was a successful fin sailor? So I guess if you go back into this, how can you be the very best small boat dinghy sailor, win some races that someone says at a local club, oh, he's just won the cadet nationals, he must know a few things about tactics and strategy. Let's get him on my club racer boat, whatever it might be, to do the whatever evening race or the big weekend something or othery intergalactic championships, and get into that way. And that's what I did, as I started to just take my Olympic experience and my small boat experience to be tactics on small mid-sized keel boats. And then at least my evolution was always then to be that person on the boat. So I've always been a tactician through my Melges 24, J70s, Melges 32s, the smaller inshore type when we're lured stuff. So it's take what you have known and what if you're good at. It's tough to be a leader without some proven leadership skills. And again, we're saying leader in the terms of team leader or tactician, watch captains, that sort of thing. It's not something that it's probably the hardest nut to crack within sailing positions on the boat, because people look to experience and look to those sorts of things. And unfortunately, you still have 56-year-old like myself that still have the ability to be there. I've certainly had younger tacticians be like, are you going to retire soon and just get out of my way?
You're like, no, I just get to make the decisions now. I don't need to do the hard work.
Well, what a luxury, right? Yes, I don't have to. I do hop on the handles when I can. I do get on the foredeck, which I think at 56 is starting to, I'm not sure if when the bowman sees me coming, whether he was like, oh yes, Richard's here to help me, or, oh no, I have to look after him too. I'm not sure which way that one goes anymore, but yeah.
No, that's great. That's great advice, I think, for anyone listening. It's, I think what I liked about what you said is whatever you're good at, sink into it and get better at it and do a lot of it. Not try to transform yourself into a person you're not. Because if you keep trying to win at the arena, at the game that you're not going to win, it's never going to be a win. You know, it's to try and find a place where you fit.
Yes. Yeah. Find a place that you fit and then, yes, make obviously the most of any opportunity that you get in the most professional way that you can. And it's not whether you're being paid or not, it's being professional. There is all sorts of parts of this sport that can be fun and it could be a party, or it's easy to get drawn in through some temptation that is unprofessional, because, you know, here we are in beautiful places and you can run amok pretty quick. And I've done that in my career, but it's like, no, I actually need to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning and having a few Coronas in the evening. But it took me a while. We live and learn. But so, yeah, it's be professional, be accountable, and be open, and
yeah, make the right choices. Absolutely.
Give it your all.
Well, Richard, you've told a lot of stories which you described as long stories, and you said sorry, but I'm sure everyone really enjoyed them. I definitely did. So thank you for your time.
Is there a story count going? And how about at the end, they'll be like, this was the story count from the Canadian.
I don't think anyone's keeping count because they would have lost it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, the sore fingers from the counter. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to our friends at WRI for sponsoring this season of the show. Go to WRIWX, that's Whiskey Romeo India Whiskey X-ray.com to get in touch. Thanks again to the team at Boat How To for sponsoring this season of the show. Don't forget to go to boathowto.com and check out the great courses they offer. On the Wind is the podcast about sailing, created by 59 North and hosted by me, Nikki Henderson, and also by Jesse, Andy, and August. The show is mixed and produced in Frederick, Maryland by Lee Cumberland. Ads are read by us, the hosts, and occasionally by 59 North's bosun Adam Brown and podcast producer Lee Cumberland. Episode artwork and website show notes are done by Laura Parent in San Francisco. The intro theme music is composed and performed by former podcast guest and musician Cameron DL, while the outro music you're hearing now is, of course, by our friends Storm Weather Shanty Choir from Bergen, Norway. We love hearing from our fans, so send your questions and comments to holdfast@59north.com. And please do us a favour and review the show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, hold fast.
I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. As I was walking down the street, I met sweet Angeline. She said, come home with me, me lad, and we'll have a cracking time. But when I awoke, it was no joke. I found I was all alone. My silver watch and my money too, and my whole bloody gear was gone. Was gone, was gone. My whole bloody gear was gone. It was when I awoke, it was no joke, for my whole bloody gear was gone. As I was walking down the street, I met Big Rapper Brown. I asked him if he would take me in, and he looked at me with a frown. He said, last time you was paid up with me, you talked up no score. But I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Once more, once more, to go to sea once more. I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Sometimes we're catching whales, me lads, but mostly we get none. With a 20-foot oar in every paw from 5 o'clock in the morn. And when daylight's gone and the night's coming on, we rest upon our oars. And oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Ashore, ashore, or snug with the girls ashore. Oh boys, you wish that you was dead or or snug with the girls ashore. Come all you seafaring lads that listen to me song. When you go a big boating, boys, make sure you do not go wrong. You take my tip when you come off a trip, don't go with any horse, but get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more.